The humans spat in the eye of the Ithorian Galactic Imperium. They would kneel to no one. The Imperium's shock troops had smashed the human fleet to a pulp and slaughtered countless innocents for this defiance. Captain Thomas Jackson gripped the handrail on the bridge of the ISS Indomitable as he surveyed the battered remnants of humanity's rebel fleet on the viewscreen. Flames licked from gaping holes in ship hulls. Bodies of the dead drifted by like space junk. "Captain, Ensign Thompson has a question," Commander Alexei Petrov said. The young ensign stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Sir, why do we keep fighting? The Imperium is too strong. We can't win this." Jackson turned to face the crew. "We fight because we must. The Ithorians conquered 100 worlds and enslaved trillions. Every other species surrendered and groveled before them," his fists clenched. "But not us. Humanity will never bow to tyrants. We believe in freedom. The Imperium intends to grind us into the dirt, but we will fight to our last breath. The survival of the human race depends on victory. If we fail, humanity dies." Jackson's eyes grew distant as he recounted the Imperium's brutal retaliation. "They hit us hard after we spat in their eye. Murloc, the cruelest son of a bitch you'll ever meet, made it his personal mission to grind us into cosmic dust. He sent his shock troops to every human colony they could find. It was a goddamn massacre." Their captain slammed his fist against the handrail, his voice rising with barely contained rage. "They bombarded our cities from orbit, reducing them to rubble. Millions of civilians slaughtered like cattle. Men, women, children. It didn't matter to them. The Ithorians had the tech and the numbers. They thought they could break us, make us kneel like everyone else." A fierce grin spread across Jackson's face. "But we didn't give in. We fought back with everything we had. Guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks. We made them bleed for every inch of space they took. The Ithorians were used to quick, easy conquests. They weren't prepared for our tenacity." Petrov chimed in, his voice filled with pride. "Our resistance caught the attention of the Keldorians. They were this little furry species, real tech wizards. They'd been under the Imperium's boot for centuries, but seeing us fight back gave them hope." Jackson nodded. "The Keldorians reached out to us in secret. They offered us their cloaking devices and stealth tech. It was a game-changer. Suddenly, we could strike at Ithorian targets with impunity, even the odds a bit. For a while there, it looked like we might actually turn the tide." The captain's expression darkened. "But Murloc, that bastard couldn't stand the thought of losing to us. He wanted to prove himself to the Ithorian Emperor, show that he could crush the upstart humans once and for all. So he launched a surprise attack on the Keldorian homeworld." Petrov shook his head, his voice heavy with sorrow. "It was a bloodbath. The Ithorians decimated the Keldorian population, destroyed their factories and research centers. Our allies were gone, and we were cut off from their tech. The Imperium came at us with renewed fury, pushing us to the brink of collapse." Jackson fell silent, his gaze haunted by the memories of those dark days. The bridge crew waited, hanging on his every word. Finally, he turned back to Ensign Thompson, his eyes blazing with determination. Jackson's eyes hardened as he continued his tale. "We were on the brink of annihilation. The Ithorians were closing in, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they reached Earth, our last stronghold, our only hope." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But our scientists and engineers, they refused to give up. They worked tirelessly day and night to find a way to turn the tide. And they did." A hint of pride crept into his voice. "They called it the graviton bomb." Petrov leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I've never heard of such a weapon." Jackson nodded. It was a closely guarded secret. The graviton bomb, when detonated, creates a localized singularity. It crushes everything within its radius into a microscopic point before violently exploding. The destructive potential was unlike anything we'd ever seen. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Ensign Thompson spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "Sir, isn't that a war crime?" The captain's gaze grew distant. We agonized over the decision. The use of such a weapon, it went against everything we believed in. But the alternative... He shook his head. "The extinction of the human race. The continued oppression of the galaxy. It was a heavy burden to bear, but we concluded that it was a necessary evil. Jackson straightened his shoulders, his voice growing stronger. We deployed the first graviton bomb against a massive Ithorian fleet massing for an attack on Earth. The results were devastating. Hundreds of ships, thousands of Ithorian soldiers and civilians instantly obliterated. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Petrov broke it, his voice low. How did the Imperium react? They were shocked. The sudden and catastrophic loss, it temporarily halted their advance. But Murloc? Jackson's lips curled into a snarl. That bastard was enraged. He saw the graviton bomb as a cowardly and dishonorable act. He swore to personally hunt down and execute every last human. The captain began to pace, his footsteps echoing on the metal deck. In the brief respite provided by the graviton bomb, we reached out to other subjugated species. We shared the technology, urged them to rise up against their oppressors. Slowly but surely, a coalition began to form. Petrov nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The Zephyrians with their advanced shield technology, and the Vulpines, master infiltrators and saboteurs. Exactly, Jackson confirmed. Together we launched coordinated attacks on Ithorian supply lines, shipyards and command centers. Our fleet, now armed with graviton bombs, took on the Imperium's military directly. The captain's voice grew somber. The war entered a new phase, even more destructive, with casualties mounting on both sides. The toll it's taken on the galaxy... He trailed off, his gaze haunted. Once thriving worlds reduced to lifeless husks. Entire species driven to the brink of extinction. The cost of freedom, of survival, it's been higher than any of us could have imagined. Jackson paused his story, the weight of the war's toll hanging heavy in the air. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence, processing the horrific details of the conflict. Ensign Thompson's face was ashen, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and disbelief. Suddenly the comm system crackled to life. Captain Jackson, this is Lieutenant Chen from Communications. We're receiving a high-priority transmission from an unknown source. They claim to be representatives of a species called the Quixarians. Jackson's brow furrowed. He had never heard of the Quixarians before. Patch them through, Lieutenant. The view screen flickered, and the image of a tall, slender being with iridescent skin and luminous eyes appeared. Greetings, Captain Jackson. I am Ambassador Zora of the Quixarian Consortium. We have been monitoring the conflict between your resistance and the Ithorian Imperium with great concern. Jackson leaned forward, his interest piqued. I wasn't aware of your species' existence until now, Ambassador. Why have you chosen to contact us? Zora inclined her head. We are a highly advanced race that has, until now, chosen to remain aloof from the affairs of the galaxy. However, the scale and destructiveness of this war have compelled us to intervene. We possess technology that far surpasses even the Ithorians, including the ability to manipulate matter at the subatomic level and create stable wormholes for instantaneous travel. Petrov's eyes widened. That's incredible. Such technology could change the course of the war. The Quixarian ambassador nodded. Indeed, which is why we are offering to mediate peace talks between your resistance coalition and the Imperium. Our goal is to end this conflict once and for all, before more lives are lost and more worlds destroyed. Jackson sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The prospect of peace was tempting, but he knew that the Ithorians, especially Murloc, could not be trusted. How can we be sure that the Imperium will negotiate in good faith? Zora's expression remained serene. We have our ways of ensuring compliance. The talks will take place at a neutral site under our protection. We will extend the invitation to the Ithorian leadership and await their response. The transmission ended, and Jackson turned to his crew. Thoughts? Petrov rubbed his chin. It's a risk. But if the Quixarians are as powerful as they claim, it might be our best chance at ending this war without further bloodshed. Ensign Thompson spoke up, his voice hesitant. But, sir, what if it's a trap? The Ithorians have proven they'll stop at nothing to crush us. Jackson nodded grimly. It's a possibility we can't ignore, but we'll take precautions. Petrov, I want our fleet on high alert. If the Ithorians try anything, we'll be ready. Days later, news arrived that the Ithorian Emperor had agreed to the peace talks, with Murloc himself set to represent the Imperium. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Murloc was too proud, too ruthless to agree to negotiations unless he had something up his sleeve. As the resistance leaders prepared to depart for the neutral site, Jackson pulled Petrov aside. Keep the fleet on standby. If Murloc makes a move, I want to be able to respond immediately. Petrov nodded solemnly. Understood, Captain. We'll be ready for anything. The peace talks were set to take place on a small uninhabited planet near the galactic core. The Quixarians had erected a sprawling compound, complete with state-of-the-art conference rooms and luxury accommodations for the delegates. Jackson and his fellow resistance leaders arrived first, along with a small contingent of their most trusted officers. The Quixarians greeted them warmly, with Ambassador Zora herself leading them on a tour of the facilities. As they walked, Jackson couldn't help but marvel at the advanced technology on display. Holographic interfaces, anti-gravity platforms, and what appeared to be some sort of matter transference device. The Quixarians were indeed a force to be reckoned with. Hours passed, and the Ithorian delegation had yet to arrive. Jackson grew increasingly uneasy. He pulled Ambassador Zora aside, his voice low and urgent. Something's not right. Murloc should have been here by now. Zora's luminous eyes met his, and for a moment, Jackson thought he saw a flicker of amusement in their depths. Patience, Captain. All will be revealed in due time. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the compound. Jackson's comm unit crackled to life, Petrov's voice filling the air. Captain, we've detected a massive Ithorian fleet dropping out of hyperspace near the planet. They're not responding to our hails. Jackson cursed under his breath. He turned to Zora, his eyes blazing with anger. You knew about this, didn't you? This whole thing was a setup. The Quixarian ambassador remained calm, a small smile playing on her lips. On the contrary, Captain, we anticipated Murloc's treachery. Watch and learn. On the view screen, Jackson watched as the Ithorian fleet moved into position, their weapon systems powering up. But before they could fire a single shot, a massive singularity appeared in the center of their formation. Ships were sucked into the swirling vortex, their hulls crumpling like tin cans under the immense gravitational forces. Escape pods and debris were pulled in, vanishing into the inky black depths. Zora's voice was calm, almost amused. A Quixarian-engineered singularity. It will trap them in a pocket dimension from which there is no escape. Murloc's treachery has been his undoing. Jackson watched in stunned silence as the once mighty Ithorian fleet was reduced to nothing more than a memory. He turned to Zora, a mix of awe and apprehension on his face. What now? The ambassador's smile widened. Now, Captain, we broadcast the truth. Across the galaxy, on every comm channel and frequency, evidence of Ithorian war crimes and atrocities began to play. Footage of the bombardment of human colonies, the slaughter of civilians, and the brutal suppression of subjugated species. The reaction was swift and explosive. On 100 worlds, the oppressed rose up against their Ithorian overlords. Riots broke out. Ithorian garrisons were overwhelmed, and the once unassailable Imperium began to crumble from within. In his opulent throne room, the Ithorian Emperor watched as his empire collapsed around him. With his most powerful fleet gone and his subjects in open revolt, he had no choice but to sue for peace. And so Captain Thomas Jackson found himself on the Quixarian homeworld, a key figure in the resistance leadership, tasked with negotiating the terms of the Imperium's surrender and the establishment of a new galactic order. As he stepped into the grand chamber where the negotiations were to take place, Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and responsibility. The fate of the galaxy, of trillions of lives, rested on the decisions made in the coming days. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. The war may have been won, but the work of building a lasting peace was only just beginning. Jackson sat at the polished obsidian table, his brow furrowed as he pored over the proposed terms of the new Galactic Order. Around him, the other resistance leaders, the fierce Zephyrian warrior Zaxos, the cunning Vulpine strategist Rico, and the brilliant Keldorian scientist Dr. Vari, engaged in heated discussions with the Quixarian delegates. "This is unacceptable," Jackson said, his voice cutting through the chatter. He pointed to a holographic display of the Quixarians' proposed hierarchy. "You're suggesting that your species should have ultimate authority over all others. That's not equality. It's just another form of oppression." Ambassador Zora's iridescent eyes narrowed. "Captain Jackson, you must understand. Our technology, our knowledge, it puts us in a unique position to guide the galaxy into a new era of peace and prosperity." Zaxos slammed his fist on the table, his golden fur bristling. "Peace? Prosperity? Under your rule, you mean? We didn't fight this war to trade one master for another." Dr. Vari nodded, her small frame belying her fierce intellect. "The Keldorians have suffered too long under the yoke of oppression. We will not submit to another." As the arguments grew more heated, Jackson felt a sense of unease settling in his gut. He had hoped that the Quixarians would be true allies in the fight for freedom, but now he saw the truth. They were just another power-hungry species looking to exploit the chaos of the war for their own gain. Suddenly, the doors to the negotiation chamber burst open, and a figure strode in flanked by a cadre of heavily armed Ithorian soldiers. Jackson's blood ran cold as he recognized the scarred, sneering face of Murloc. "Well, well, well," Murloc drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "What do we have here, a bunch of primitives playing at diplomacy?" Zora stood, her face a mask of shock. "General Murloc, but how? You were trapped in the singularity." Murloc laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You underestimate me, Ambassador. I am not so easily disposed of. And now I have come to reclaim what is rightfully mine. The Ithorian Imperium, with myself as its rightful ruler." Jackson and the other resistance leaders leaped to their feet, drawing their weapons. The Quixarian security personnel, caught off guard, fumbled for their own sidearms. In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos, with energy bolts crisscrossing the room and searing holes in the walls. Jackson dove behind an overturned table, his mind racing. He knew that if Murloc succeeded in seizing control, all their sacrifices, all the lives lost, would be for nothing. The galaxy would be plunged right back into the darkness of tyranny. As he returned fire, dodging the sizzling plasma bolts that whizzed past his head, Jackson had a moment of clarity. The Quixarians, the Ithorians, even the Resistance, they were all fighting for the same thing: power. The power to shape the galaxy according to their own vision. But that was the problem, wasn't it? As long as there was a hierarchy, as long as one species or group held dominion over the others, there would always be oppression. There would always be war. "Stop!" Jackson yelled, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "Stop fighting, all of you!" Miraculously, the shooting ceased. Murloc, his face twisted in a snarl, kept his weapon trained on Jackson. "What are you playing at, human?" Jackson stood, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "This is what they want," he said, his voice steady. "The Quixarians, the Ithorians, anyone who seeks to dominate others, they want us divided, fighting amongst ourselves. Because as long as we're fighting each other, we're not fighting them." He turned to the assembled delegates, his eyes blazing with conviction. "But what if we rejected their game entirely? What if, instead of a hierarchy, we built a federation, a union of equals, where every species has a say, where every voice matters?" Zaxos, nursing a wound on his arm, looked at Jackson with a mix of surprise and respect. "A federation? It's never been done before." "Exactly," Jackson said, "because no one has had the courage to try, but we have a chance now. A chance to break the cycle of oppression and build something new, something better." He turned to Zora, his gaze unflinching. "Ambassador, you said your species values peace and prosperity. prove it. Join us in creating a true democracy, not another empire in disguise." For a long moment, Zora was silent. Then slowly she nodded. "You are right, Captain Jackson. Our arrogance has blinded us. We will support this federation as equals among equals." Murloc, his face twisted in rage, raised his weapon. "Traitors! Cowards! I will not let this stand!" He aimed at Jackson, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a blur of motion interposed itself between them. It was Alexei Petrov, Jackson's loyal friend and second in command. The plasma bolt meant for Jackson struck Petrov in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, his life ebbing away in a pool of crimson. "No!" Jackson screamed, dropping to his knees beside his fallen comrade. "Alexei, stay with me, damn it." But it was too late. Petrov, the man who had stood by Jackson's side through the darkest days of the war, was gone. In the stunned silence that followed, the Quixarian security forces moved in, disarming Murloc and his soldiers. The once proud Ithorian general, his face slack with defeat, offered no resistance as he was led away. Days turned into weeks as the delegates worked tirelessly to hammer out the details of the new Galactic Federation. There were disagreements, of course, and old grudges that threatened to derail the process. But through it all, Jackson and the other leaders held fast to their vision of a galaxy united not by force, but by shared principles of justice, equality, and freedom. And so, on a clear, crisp day, with the stars of 1,000 worlds shining down upon them, the Federation Charter was signed. Species that had once been bitter enemies now stood side by side, committed to a future of cooperation and mutual respect. For Jackson, it was a bittersweet moment. He couldn't help but think of all those who weren't there to see it. Petrov, the brave men and women of the resistance, the countless civilians who had lost their lives in the war. Their sacrifices had made this moment possible, and he silently vowed to honor their memory by ensuring that the Federation they had fought for would endure. As he watched the new generation of leaders, young and idealistic, taking their first steps into a brighter future, Jackson felt a sense of hope stirring in his heart. The road ahead would be long and difficult, he knew. There would be challenges and setbacks, moments when the old ways of thinking threatened to reassert themselves. But for now, at least, the galaxy was at peace, and that was enough. That was everything. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.